Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of weaving, ours is the caravan of despair. Come, let him come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of weaving, ours is the caravan of despair.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Stillwater. We are a diverse religious community seeking spiritual experience and all forms of knowledge in an atmosphere of acceptance, love, and respect. Our mission is to protect and perpetuate religious freedom, tolerance, and knowledge, to challenge injustice, and to nurture and serve one another and the wider community. This morning, our speaker is Reverend Mark Christian, and we have musicians Annye Love and Doug Williams. And we'll have announcements from Terry Chaffin.
After the service, please join us in the social room for conversation and refreshments. Today is the first Sunday in January, so it's committee meeting Sunday. After social time, feel free to find your people and participate. The board has changed their regular monthly meeting from the first Tuesday of the month to the second Tuesday, so there will not be a board meeting this week. Instead, they will meet Tuesday, January 13th at 6:30. The book discussion group will meet Friday, January 9th in the forum room to discuss Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. Video calling is available for those who can't attend in person. For more information, contact Susan Bullard. As you likely read in the January newsletter, Rebecca Stewart Gray and Donna Sinnis have formed a hiking covenant group, which will meet weekly on Saturdays at 1 p.m. until February, and then switch to 9:30 a.m. as the weather warms up. Somehow I doubt it's going to warm up in February, but that's just my thinking. So. The Crafty UUs meet on the second Saturday of the month, which is this coming Saturday, January 10th at 2 p.m. in the forum room. Bring whatever you want to work on and share some time together. The contact person is Joe Melnick. Next Sunday's sermon will be provided by Reverend Catherine Shearer. Her sermon title will be Something Old and Something New. Also next Sunday, we will have a forum led by Tana Del Prete and Donald Brown, which will be drumming and rhythms. It starts at 12:30. The second annual chili cook-off this year will include karaoke and will be Saturday, January 24th from 5:30 to 8. And there's a sign-up sheet in the social room. Yes. And you can also sign up on CH meetings. Is that right? Okay. Got it. $15 per person. Kids under 12 eat free. As we get closer, the people who make chili will want to have that there at 5. Starting in February, Susan Bullard and Linda Smolin will lead a Thursday evening adult religious education program called Spirit of Life. Each session will explore a different aspect of Unitarian Universalist spirituality. Are there other announcements?
I think our committee's happening today.
Yes.
So music committee is happening on the 7th, Wednesday the 7th at 6:45. So if you are interested in the music program, whether you're on the committee or not, come join us. 7th, Wednesday the 7th at 6:45 here. Thank you.
Yes. I'm not going to make you repeat it, but it just occurred to me you're not at a microphone. So sorry about that if you are listening elsewhere. Other announcements?
I don't know if it's legit, but I was at a meeting and some people wanted information on asthma and mushrooms, and I forgot to take the papers. So if anyone is interested in that, let me know. I'll give them to you right now.
I'm just checking on the mic.
It was on, yay. Other announcements? Okay, your minute?
Well, our church minute this morning mostly is welcome and Happy New Year. Also, you might note that I brought some black-eyed peas. They're not vegetarian, though.
Well, the peas are.
The peas are not, they're not with with vegetables. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm running a little late and disorganized this morning. We're gradually getting everything onto CH Meetings, our CHMeeting app, and I encourage you all to use that. Another thing is that we're getting ready to start our annual canvassing, and still looking for one more volunteer if anybody would like to join us. We'll be meeting beginning January 15th approximately at Marty Dermer's home, and even though canvassing for money doesn't sound like a fun occupation, it actually is. You get to speak with a lot of people, and we're not high pressure at all. The other thing is that I'd like to mention is we've started to go over our pledging from last year, and we're financially doing quite well. But in terms of people, not quite as well. We'd like to see everybody who pledged follow through on their pledges, whether they're large or small. And if you are having any problem with meeting your pledge, just let us know. Contact Lynn Little, our treasurer, and we'll be glad to modify your pledge. But please participate in it. That's more important than the amount. And really, that's about all I have for us today. So we can move on with prelude. Or, yeah. A little bit out of order, I guess.
Somewhere Gift, a gift of love, a gift from God, a gift from life itself. Come, let us worship together, for this is the day we've been given to live in, to love in, and in time to die in. Let us rejoice in our capacity to think, feel, hear, and understand. And let us rejoice in the promise and the possibility of this day. Let there be light to drive away the darkness. Let there be wisdom to shine on the unknown. Let there be love to heal our aloneness. Let each of us be a light for one another.
Our opening hymn is number 93, To Mercy, Pity, Peace, and Love.
Yeah, problem. It's not in there, sorry.
Good morning. Okay, today we're going to have a multicultural tale to tell from this book. It's written by Pleasant Despain and illustrated by Joe Schlitka, and it is copywritten and published with August House. The name of the tale today is Medicine Wolf. So, as you can tell, it's an Indian from a Native American tale. And it starts like this. Blackfoot Indians were moving from the summer to the winter camp one year, long ago. As they went, they were attacked by a band of Crow warriors, and several of the Blackfoot were killed. A young woman of the tribe named Sits by the Door was taken as a slave. She was tied to a horse and taken to the Crow camp on the Yellowstone River. Sits by the Door was made to do the hardest jobs, and if ever she complained, she was kicked and given no food to eat. The man who had captured her tied her up at night and made her sleep next to his wife. But the wife had a good heart and tried to show kindness to Sits by the Door. Although they spoke different tongues, both understood sign language. One day the wife told Sits by the Door that the warriors had decided to kill her. She had to escape that night. When her husband was sleeping soundly, the wife cut the rawhide thongs from Sits by the Door's hands and feet. She gave her a small bag of dried meat called pemmican and told her to travel far and fast, for the warriors would surely try to capture her in the morning. Sits by the Door ran and walked and ran again until the sun began to rise. Exhausted, she crawled into a small cave and fell asleep. She stayed hidden for 3 days more. At last, the Crow warriors gave up the search. She was free. By this time, Sits by the Door's strength, as well as her food, were nearly gone. She began the long journey home with little more than a strong heart. Even worse, she discovered that she was being followed by a large gray wolf. Sits by the Door walked for 2 nights and a day before falling to the cold ground, ready to die. The wolf had followed well behind her, patiently awaiting this moment. He approached her cautiously and sniffed at her hands. Sits by the Door could smell his unwashed fur and the stink of his breath. She prayed for a quick death. To her great amazement, the wolf didn't sink his yellow teeth into her throat. Rather, he laid down beside her to keep her warm and safe. In the morning, he ran away, only to return a short while later, dragging half of a freshly killed buffalo calf. Sits by the Door cooked the meat and shared it with the wolf. By the following day, she had regained her strength. The wolf walked beside her for the remainder of the journey home. When she came into the Blackfoot camp, the people were excited to see her and impressed with her new friend. She told them how the wolf had saved her life and added, "There is strong medicine between us. I call him Medicine Wolf." The people understood her words. They believed in the magic bond or medicine that can exist between an animal and a human. The Council of Elders decided that the wolf could stay in the village and live with Sits by the Door. Even the camp dogs had to leave the wolf in peace. He stayed with his human friend until she died many years later. Then he left the village and was never seen again. Okay, the reading this morning, Mark chose an excerpt from the Humanist Manifesto 1, written by Raymond B. Bragg, who was secretary of the Western Unitarian Conference when he wrote this in 1933. It is one of 3 manifestos. The second was written in 1973, and the third one in 2003. The Humanist Manifestos lay out a humanist worldview. The central theme of all 3 manifestos is the elaboration of a philosophy and value system which does not necessarily include belief in any personal deity or higher power. Each was signed at its launch by various prominent members of the Unitarian Church, academia, and others who are in general agreement with the principles. There were 34 signers, and 10 of them were Unitarians, ministers, members, or administrators. There were 10 academics, including John Dewey from Columbia University. And there was a rabbi from Columbia University who was advisor to Jewish students. So
you will hear in these principles things that you have heard before as part of our principles and that you may have thought about before. I am not a humanist because I'm not, because, because as you know, I work with the world of spirit, so I'm in contact there. But my father was. My father was a humanist. And in the 1980s, I went with him and my mother to a humanist meeting here in Stillwater, and most, I can't say most, but many, if not most, of the people there were from this church. Okay, Humanist Manifesto 1, written in 1933 by Raymond B. Bragg, who was secretary of the Western Unitarian Conference. Today, man's larger understanding of the universe, his scientific achievements, and deeper appreciation of brotherhood have created a situation which requires a new statement of the means and purposes of religion. Excuse me. Such a vital, fearless, and frank religion capable of furnishing adequate social goals and personal satisfactions may appear to many people as a complete break with the past. While this age does owe a vast debt to traditional religions, it is nonetheless obvious that any religion that can hope to be a synthesizing and dynamic force for today must be shaped for the needs of this age. To establish such a religion is a major necessity of the present. It is a responsibility which rests upon this generation. Therefore, we affirm the following, and there are 15 principles. First, religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. Second, humanism believes that man is a part of nature and that he has emerged as a result of a continuous process. Third, holding an organic view of life, humanists find that the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected. Fourth, humanism recognizes that man's religious culture and civilization, as clearly depicted by anthropology and history, are the product of a gradual development due to his interaction with his natural environment and with his social heritage. The individual born into a particular culture is largely is largely molded by that culture. Fifth, humanism asserts that the nature of the universe depicted by modern science makes unacceptable any supernatural or cosmic guarantees of human values. Obviously, humanism does not deny the possibilities of realities as yet undiscovered, but it does insist that the way to determine the existence and the value of any and all realities is by means of intelligent inquiry and by the assessment of their relationships to the human needs. Religion must formulate its hopes and plans in the light of the scientific spirit and method. Sixth, we are convinced that the time has passed for theism, deism, modernism, and several varieties of new thought. Seventh, religion consists of those actions, purposes, and experiences which are humanly significant. Nothing human is alien to the religious. It includes labor, art, science, philosophy, love, friendship, recreation, all that is in its degree expressive of intelligently satisfying human living. The distinction between the sacred and the secular can no longer be maintained. Eighth, religious humanism considers the complete realization of human personality to be the end of man's life and seeks its development and fulfillment in the here and now. This is the explanation of the humanist's social passion. Ninth, In the place of the old attitudes involved in worship and prayer, the humanist finds his religious emotions expressed in a heightened sense of personal life and in cooperative effort to promote social well-being. 10th, it follows that there will be no uniquely religious emotions and attitudes of the kind hitherto associated with belief in the supernatural. 11th, man will learn to face the crises of life in terms of his knowledge of their naturalness and probability. Reasonable and manly attitudes will be fostered by education and supported by custom. We assume that humanism will take the path of social and mental hygiene and discourage sentimental and unreal hopes and wishful thinking. 12th, believing that religion must work increasingly for joy in living, religious humanists aim to foster in man and to encourage aim to foster the creative in man and to encourage achievements that add to the satisfaction of life. 13, religious humanism maintains that all associations and institutions exist for the fulfillment of human life. The intelligent evaluation, transformation, control, and direction of such associations and institutions with a view to the enhancement of human life is the purpose and program of humanism. Certainly, religious institutions, their ritualistic forms, ecclesiastical methods, and communal activities must be reconstituted as rapidly as experience allows in order to function effectively in a modern world. 14th, the humanists are firmly convinced that existing acquisitive and profit-motivated society has shown itself to be inadequate, and that a radical change in methods, controls, and motives must be instituted. A socialized and cooperative economic order must be established to the end that the equitable distribution of the means of life be possible. The goal of humanism is a free and universal society in which people voluntarily and intelligently cooperate for the common good. Humanists demand a shared life in a shared world. 15th and last, we assert that human will, A, affirm life rather than deny it. B, seek to elicit the possibilities of life, not flee from them. And C, endeavor to establish the conditions of a satisfactory life for all, not merely for a few. By this positive morale and intention, humanism will be guided, and from this perspective and alignment, the techniques and efforts of humanism will flow. So stand these theses of religious humanism. Though we consider the religious forms and ideas of our fathers no longer adequate, the quest for the good life is still the central task of mankind. Man is at last becoming aware that he alone is responsible for the realization of the world of his dreams, that he has within himself the power for its achievement, and he must set intelligence and will to that task.
And with that, it's time for the offering. Our church is supported by your donations. And we're in a new year now. And a portion of our plate will be shared with the Seville Center for Child Advocacy.
Doug saying over version of it. And we chose that song because, well, this is the first Sunday of the new year, and we were hoping to bring some hope for the, with over the rainbow. This song that I'm going to sing and play was written after World War II, sung by George Beverly Shea. It's called If I Can Help Somebody. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can welcome strangers, tell them they belong, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a human should, if I can bring back beauty to the world for good, if I can live love's message as the Master did, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. I want to thank Shiitake for doing that reading. I know parts of it were challenging for her, parts of it not. I think all religions should be sometimes challenging and sometimes not. Anything that we're not at some point challenged with our faith, I don't think it's actually real. I joked with Shiitake when we were observing this that I once heard a choir director explain to the choir who were disagreeing with some of the words that were asking you to sing it, not to sign it. Unlike the Humanist Manifesto where they were asked to sign it, not sing it. Be interesting to put that to, anyway. I also want to note that one of the reasons I shifted to that, I called an audible on this yesterday and called Taki. At this point in time yesterday, I did not have any voice at all. I estimate I'm now probably around 60% voice, so I'm hanging in there. So. But this is the fourth in my series of sermons on Unitarian Universalist history. Just to give you a quick recap, we begin in the middle of the 1500s in Eastern Europe with Transylvania and Polish groups developing an anti-Trinitarian and very, for that time, liberal point of view about religion. They were pacifists. They believed in believers' baptism, not infant baptism, that said that you needed to know what you were being baptized into. That being baptized by itself wasn't enough. You had to have an assent to it, the believer's baptism, which runs through, of course, that's where the Baptists come out in the end. So that was in the middle of the 1700s. That carries a point where then a conservative religious hegemony comes over Eastern Europe, and they force the free thinkers, the anti-Trinitarians, the Unitarians, the Universalists out of places like Poland and Transylvania, or they either go underground or they leave. This is at the same time the Spanish Inquisition is forcing the Jews out of Spain. They end up in Leiden, in Holland, as do a lot of the anti-Trinitarian and liberal thinkers and liberal religionists, where there's some connection. That's also the same place where Erasmus, the Catholic humanist, was studying. So this idea of humanism begins to impound that. And at that point, humanism is really described as a regrabbing, a reconnection to the ancient roots of philosophy, to Socrates, to Aristotle, to Plato, to all of those types of things, and saying that they are legitimate today, whereas through the Dark Ages they were cast aside and said those are absolutely irrelevant and had been cast down and thrown away. Erasmus and others picked them up, and there was kind of a brushing side by side there. Then shortly after that is when the Mayflower, the Pilgrims, leave England, where they were Congregationalists, go to Leiden, again, where they're next to all these other people, and eventually goes back to England so they can come to New England. Excuse me. Where it steps into the second part of our history, which was the roots that we put down in New England as the standing ordered churches of Massachusetts and the East Coast, and the formation of our country around that kind of idea that we could have determinism for ourselves, not just religiously, but politically as well, which was an impetus to the starting of the democracy. The next sermon took us from New England, moving across the continent with the adoption of transcendentalism by Thoreau and Emerson and others. That idea that there is something divine which is transcending into us and transcending out of us. Transcendentalism was actually a form of a radical immanence of God, immanence of religion, that it was so thoroughly in things that you could not find anything that was not touched by it. There was no sacred and profane. It was all part of the one that is. And it moves across through the Civil War, where we become involved in some of the abolitionist aspects, although more on the Universalist side than the Unitarian side, and ends up in about 1892. I would end that section of our history with the work of Jenkins Lloyd Jones as part of the Western Unitarian Conference in the creation of the World Parliament of Religions, which ran concomitant with the World's Fair of 1892 in Chicago. So there's a geographical shift there from Boston to Chicago as the West, as that was the West. That was the Western Conference, was way out in the West, Iowa, way out in the West, Indiana, way out in the West, Illinois. So then we begin to kind of settle in to this next section of our history. One of the things that's happened along through this, I mentioned the side-by-side notion of our faith rubbing up against the Erasmus humanism, the embrace of the old ways of philosophy. And it comes to this part of the central part of the country, and it develops a true American aspect to it. This is where the most significant part of that last section there, that 1800s, develops with the creation of women in the ministry. And the Unitarians in particular, but also the Universalists, ordained a great deal of women to the ministry in the late 19th century. I think upwards to about 100. Then they radically put an end to it. They decided that ministry, I say they, the men, put a decision that ministry should have a manly face again. That they felt like ministry was being lost in its value in the public because all these women were doing it. So we went from ordaining about 100 people in the 19th century to none until 1950. It does come back, and it comes back in full form. By the time I was ordained in 1997, our ministry was split, 50-50 men and women. And it was at that point in 97, it was still very tilted, that the women tended to be in very small congregations and the men in larger congregations. But that has shifted in the ensuing 25 years or so, to where now many of, and most of the large congregations are being led by, many of them, I shouldn't say most, Many of the larger Unitarian congregations are now led by women. So that equity has been coming about in the 20th century as part of humanism. I say that ironically because, as you might note from that Humanist Manifesto, it was full of man and brotherhood and he, big man, big he, man, manly man, yes. That's part of what it was. But it was only part of it. As I said, by the end period of this time, we got back to ordaining women again. And that has been the radical transformation, which will be the part of my next sermon as we encounter feminism. But I want to talk about this period of time from the late 1890s until the middle 1950s. It was in this era we started to get Unitarian churches in this part of the world. Oklahoma City was founded in 1893. The city was founded in 1889, as we know, but there was a Unitarian church in there 4 years later in 1893. It was not always a strong church. It was up and down, as all churches go through. That's also when we got First Dallas in 1899. Tulsa was a little later in 1923, I think. Memphis had a church early, St. Louis, New Orleans, Denver. These were the outposts. And one of the things that came in with that was this sense that, well, ours was a faith for the intellectually proper, the people who could read philosophy and understand it. Yes. Yeah, we tended to stink of our own smell in those days, and we still do sometimes. We're quite proud of ourselves often. But one of the things that happens in that period is a shift, a theological shift. Excuse me. I came to articulate this when I was in seminary. I went to Phillips Theological Seminary, which is a Disciples of Christ school. I joked that I was in seminary long enough. Well, I was there really only there 4.5 years. It's supposed to be a 3.5-year program, but I was working full time, so I took closer to 5. But I joked that they changed cities, changed names, and changed presidents, and almost all of that was true. But one of the things that I observed as I was there is that I wasn't that different from the students from more traditional religious paths. It's just I started with different questions. You see, traditional theology starts with the question of who and what is God. Theology, study of God. And I think liberal theology, liberal religion, starts with a different question. Who and what are human beings? I am of the personal opinion that until we understand who and what human beings are, we really don't have a whole lot of reason to be wondering who and what God is. There's enough confusion about what human beings are. Trying to sort through the events of this week. Trying to sort through military actions being taken in our name. For what purpose? Is that a divine calling to secure that area? A reinvention of the Monroe Doctrine and manifest destiny, that God has a plan for the continent and it is to be an American continent. I don't think so. I think it's explained more by human conditions. And I was listening to President Trump talk about this yesterday. About 6 or 7 minutes into it, he got to the real point and started talking about Venezuelan oil. And I really think that is the big point. Plus, I also think there's a humanistic aspect of that too, because just 2 days before he did this major invasion or police action, depending on who you're talking to, they had released the transcripts of the presentation to the intelligence community in Congress, listing all the nastiness in the Epstein files and in the issues of that, and they had blocked that from being heard publicly. But on Friday afternoon, they released the transcripts. So before people could take the transcripts of what really happened, what they were saying about it, here's this new big thing to think about. You remember the movie Wag the Dog with Dustin Hoffman? Well, I wish this was a Wag the Dog scenario, that was all done with Hollywood, but it wasn't. But the point was the same, to cover up a mess. And that's where I'm saying that's a humanistic observation. rather than saying that we have a divine imperative to secure the world for America, we would say that we have humanist values in this nation. And we want to spread those in the better ways. But we also have humanist values that are not what we aspire to: greed and power and just the ability to want to get our way. That's part of humanism, to make that critique and say this is a humanist action more so than a divine one. I want to introduce you to a few things that happened in this period of time. Again, as the country is moving and filling in, I'll introduce you to a couple of people. One is a man named John Haynes Holmes. And John Haynes Holmes was the minister, I think it was of All Souls Unitarian in New York City, although it could have been Community Church. I can't recall right now which one it was. He was significant because he was a pacifist. He was a pacifist in World War I and World War II, which put him in disfavor largely culturally. But still, he was leading a growing congregation who disagreed with him. Most of his congregation were not pacifists. They thought we had a place in World War I and World War II. But their minister didn't, and they understood that was a perspective, and that he could lead from one position and they could be another. Again, it's how we live our lives, how we're living our lives in balance with what we find authoritative and imperative. Another person in this period of time I want you to know about, and I've talked about him a number of times, is A. Powell Davies, Arthur Powell Davies. He was I think he was from Wales, but came across, and he was the minister at All Souls Unitarian in Washington, D.C. You notice a lot of those All Souls names? That is our second most common, it's our second most common name of a Unitarian church, the first being First. I've got a colleague who just died this last week, Walt Weeder, who said he wanted to go somewhere and start a new church and just name it the 23rd Unitarian Church of Phoenix, and let people wonder where the other 22 are. Walt was a lovely humanist, a great man, and I love him dearly. The other thing that happened here, again, we started with these few big cities getting Unitarian churches. No place like Stillwater, no place like Colorado Springs or Norman or anything like that, who were all early fellowships. In the post-World War II era, well, let me go back to A. Powell Davies. I'm sorry, I jumped off of him too quick. He was radical in his anti-McCarthy standpoint. This is Washington, D.C. He was in the midst of this. And he was always arguing against McCarthy from the very beginning, which let him stand out, which is what made the church grow. And actually, he had members of the Supreme Court who were members of his congregation who came and sat in the pews on Sunday. So the idea of being the preacher preaching to a number of Supreme Court justices, boy, that's daunting. That is daunting. I have enough challenge talking to you all, much less Supreme Court justices, although I did have a state Supreme Court justice in Oklahoma City, so a little different. But Powell Davies was a dynamic preacher. He was activist. He was very socially engaged, so much so that people around the D.C. area, the Beltway, began to make telephone connections to listen to his sermon. There would be a group of 5 or 6 people sitting around a telephone listening to him preach, that someone is holding the phone up in the sanctuary. That's something that's hard for us to imagine. We just spent thousands of dollars to be able to put our stuff on YouTube and things like that. The idea people would call up and listen on a phone, with a group of people listening on a phone, that's how dynamic that was. That's how hungry people were for that. But I want to state that other aspect there, that he was speaking against McCarthyism in a place that was hungry for it, and shift over to All Souls in Tulsa, another All Souls. John Wolfe was the minister there and is one of my personal mentors. I've known John most of my life. I knew John most of my life. He died about 5 years ago, I think. But what made him stand out was that he was the only voice in Tulsa saying, this guy down in South Tulsa, Oral Roberts, He's full of it. Yeah. Oral Roberts will run around saying, expect a miracle. John said, no, don't expect a miracle. Create a masterpiece. And that distinction is what led All Souls Unitarian in Tulsa to, for a time, become the largest Unitarian church in the country. Again, Powell Davies standing out in humanistic fashion to what was going on around him. John Wolfe standing out, again, as humanistic. And John had an interesting perspective on that. He said he went to Peoria, and the people there were all theists, so he was a humanist. And when he came to, that was his first church, was Peoria, Illinois. His second church, they were all humanists, so he became more of a theist. He needed to have that distinction. And there's place in our faith to have both. There's place, and we often are that. Early in my ministry, in the late 1990s, the UUA was trying to figure out who we are theologically. And they put out the survey, which was a useless survey because there were no restraints on it. I talked to people who filled out it 6 or 7 times, so it has no statistical validation. But the one thing they came out with in determining who we are is we are the church of the hyphen. We're Christian humanists. We're Jewish humanists. We're pagan humanists. We're pagan Christian humanists. We're pagan Jewish Buddhist humanists. But the one that kept getting tacked on the end was humanist. So this is, 100 years, not 100 years. This is 75 years after the Humanist Manifesto. Of course, the humanism had been growing long before somebody thought to put it down into a manifesto. That's reflected in a period of about 100 years, or not 100 years, a shifting that idea of the humanism evolving in us from the time when we said that it wasn't just the theology that was the Bible. When Emerson could take a walk in the woods and find spiritual understanding, when people could read Emily Dickinson and find spiritual meaning and poetry and prose and draw religious spiritual meaning from that, that is how humanism develops among us. That it's about the human question of who we are and what we're about. Humanists became a hegemonistic force in our movement. There was a time, and some particularly of the fellowship model, because these were congregations that were put in place with the acknowledgement up front that it was unlikely they would ever have a minister or a full-time minister or a Bostonian minister. Because we knew that the Boston people weren't going to leave Boston. They just simply aren't. That's what Boston is, But so we put out these congregations, this was a fellowship community in 1947. The first one was in Colorado Springs, and I think Norman was the third one, or the fourth. It was in that same era, But these were popping up everywhere, that the UUA put a little money into it, and came up with an outstanding public relations platform to offer out an advertising campaign that ran in things like Newsweek and Time, that was under the theme of, "Are you a Unitarian and don't know it?" And you'll still run into people who discover our traditions, discover our churches and fellowships and societies, who say, "I didn't know that there was a faith that did what I did. That I've been a Unitarian my whole life and I didn't know it. A Unitarian Universalist my whole life and I didn't know it." So that's something to kind of bear in mind. But I go back to the shift here for humanism. What's important to pull out of this is, I think, it's where you start with this question. Is your primary question about what is the nature of God? Or is it what is the nature of human beings? And for me, it is what is the nature of human beings. And if I understand enough about the individual human beings, writ large, multiplicities of them, I can begin to have an umbrella understanding. And maybe I can begin to understand who and what excuse me, God is, after I've come to recognize who and what human beings are. So humanism becomes a dominant force. And particularly among the fellowship movements, there is a time that they begin to take the fact that they are fellowships and not churches quite seriously. If a church does it, we don't do it. So instead of having a sermon, they have a talk. Instead of having hymns, they have songs. The congregation at Hope Tulsa, they don't have a sanctuary, they have a great hall. A movement away from religious terms. And I embrace the religious terms. I call this a sermon. I am a preacher. The distinction between fellowship and church no longer means anything really in our movement. There was a time when it meant that this was a lay-led congregation and would stay a lay-led congregation. That's not the case anymore. It's just a term. Is church the right word? Maybe not. Is fellowship the right word? Maybe not. Is society the right word? No. Oftentimes people will be the Unitarian Universalists of somewhere. Maybe we're the Unitarian Universalists of Stillwater. And we eschew and we leave behind that language altogether. But one of the things that does happen in this period of time is that language becomes even more important to us than it has ever been. Which is where I'm going to kind of trail off here. Because I want to start kind of what I threw out there. That manifesto was full of man and he, and when God was still recognized, it was he, unquestionably. These come together with the merger of the Unitarians and Universalists in 1961. They'd been moving toward merger quite some time earlier. The youth groups from the Unitarians and the Universalists, the American Unitarian Youth and the Universalist Youth of America, merged in about 1950. So 11 years before the merger of the consolidation of the two movements, and became the Liberal Religious Youth, LRY, or as I preferred to call it, Lusty Raunchy Youth, or Little Red Yo-Yos. Those are the two alternatives that I like. But anyway, they came together. And later, the Unitarians and the Universalist congregations came together. Interestingly, though, the Congregationalists were trying to woo the Universalists. So the Universalists could have become part of the Congregationalist movement, which is United Church of Christ. And they would have been fine there, and they're fine here. But we offered them more than the Congregationalists did. I don't know whether it was money or what it was, because they had property, but they didn't have money. And we had money, but we didn't really have the properties. See, there were Universalist churches all over the place. There weren't many Unitarian churches. So that's some insight about what was going on in that chunk of our history. The things to remember is that the language becomes so important. You know, what we call things, we become allergic to words. Some of you may remember Robert Henry. Robert Henry was Oklahoma's Attorney General for a time. He was then later president of OCU, Oklahoma City University. Before that, he was on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and he's a personal friend of mine. He was the state rep in Shawnee when I was there. And he said, you know, I just don't know how Unitarians can sing. They're too busy reading ahead to make sure they agree with all the words. And this was the example he gave. He said, I can see you singing Onward Christian Soldiers. Onward, as to, And I said, Robert, we shifted that one out and we turned it into Forward Through the Ages, which many other congregations do as well. But that was his point, that we were so busy on those words that we were missing the spirit behind it. And that's what the correction in this period of time was too. So we come to a time there when the Unitarians and the Universalists formally have consolidation in 1961, and we put out this blue hymnal. It was full of humanist songs. Well, it was full of humanism. The readings were all humanist, or largely humanist. There's some great readings in there, but they are chock full of man, men, he, him, his. And a large part of the congregations in the 1960s decided they didn't like it. And that's where I'm going to leave this sermon to end, where we'll pick it up in March. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Mystery, mystery, Life is a riddle and a mystery, mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Amen.
Our next hymn, is number 312, Here on the Paths of Every Day. Please stand if you're able.
Please know that as challenging as the world can be, and is, that it can be and also is a blessing. And it's your choice to embrace the blessing or let it pass. And once you've embraced the blessing, it's your choice to share it or to hoard it. I hope we all share the blessings of life with everyone and everything we see. Amen.
That concludes the recorded portion of our service. We continue with trail markers, which will not be recorded.